Hey everybody, what's up? Chad Wesley Smith here for Juggernaut Training Systems and Juggernaut AI. And today I'm going to be doing part 3 in this series that we've done over the last several weeks. And I'm going to be talking about how to design a peaking block. So before you watch this one, make sure you go back, watch the hypertrophy, watch the strength block videos because it all works together. If all of those videos seem like a little bit too much for you and you'd rather just have someone else design your program, well, we got you covered on that too. You can get a 2-week free trial of the Juggernaut AI app. And that'll apply all the principles that I've been talking about in these videos specifically to you because it's going to look at your gender, age, height, weight, strength, experience, weak points in the lifts, how much you sleep, how much you eat, are you trying to gain weight, lose weight, what are your weak points in the lifts, all that stuff, and design a custom program totally for you. Some may say the smartest program for you. And there's a link down in the description up in the corner, or just visit juggernautai.app for that 2-week free trial. All right, so as we get into peaking training, let's first talk about why would you want to listen to this, White Walker-eyed, cherubic, jolly man on this video talk about peaking training? And I think you should, because I believe that I was one of the best peakers in all of powerlifting relative, and some may just say that I was a sandbagger and I didn't, go heavy enough in training. And that's why it looks like this. But I think it was because I was great at managing the fitness-fatigue relationship and tapering my training for these great meet performances, far exceeding the lifting that I had done in the gym. So for that, my evidence that over the course of my powerlifting career, and this is going through pretty much most of the meets that I did, I'm going to tell you what my best training squat was and my best squat in the meet was, and similar, the same equipment, and I always pride myself on squatting to quality depth regardless, because friends don't let friends squat high, and you got to be your best friend, your own best friend. So I would never let myself squat high. So starting off, even in my first meet, 765 in the gym to 800 at the meet. We went on to 815 in the gym for 865 in a meet, 825 in the gym for a then American record in the 308s class of 905 in the meet. Then was away being injured, doing some strongman, doing all that kind of stuff. Came back, my first meet back after about a 6-month hiatus while I rehabbed some herniated discs. I squatted 835 in the gym and then went for 937 in the meet. That meet, I actually did 838 as my opener. So I opened heavier at the meet than I had ever squatted in the gym before, by 3 pounds, but it still counts. So 835 to 937. The next meet, 870 to 959. And then finally, before squatting my PR, 440 kilos, 970 pounds at Pro Raw over in Melbourne, Australia, my best gym squat was 915. And if you watch that 915 and you watch the 970, the 970 is faster and better than the 915 was. And same, very similar effects in the bench press as well. I know before I benched 540, my best in the gym was 515. Then I benched 520 in the gym to do 551 in the meet, then 525 in the gym to bench my meet PR of 567 pounds. And all of this is happening through effective peaking, of course, but a great peak starts at the beginning of the training cycle. So you're not going to make a great training block with just having a great peak, because the peak kind of can't exist on its own without the hypertrophy and general strength work being done effectively before it. You can certainly ruin a great training block with a bad peak and a bad taper, but it's the cherry on top, the sprinkles on the cupcake, the spire at the top of the skyscraper. So everything before it's got to be done well. Then it's also about meet psychology and all that stuff. But peaking is important, and what it's going to be designed for throughout the course of your training is increasing neural force production. So in hypertrophy, we built bigger muscles. In general strength training, we taught those muscles to produce more force from a neural standpoint and just a muscular force standpoint with that mid-range work, 3 to 6 reps, 75 up to 90% intensity. And now we're really going to get into the neural force production. So how well can your brain, your nervous system, signal to your muscles to recruit as many fibers at the same time as quickly as possible to work together in this synchronized, synergistic fashion that we call technique, all right, and produce as much force through that specific range of motion as possible. So we're increasing neural force production. We are honing our technical prowess. All right. It's those last refining touches, because as much as you want, your squats with 85% and 100% to look identical, they're not going to quite look identical. So we got to put those last touches on with those heaviest weights. We want to retain our hypertrophy from our earlier phases. Peaking training by nature is low in volume. And yeah, you're still going to have some accessory work that can complement it, but very unlikely that unless you're a very new lifter or on a shitload of Soviet sports supplements, it would be very hard to build muscle with what is truly peaking type of training. So we want to retain all of our muscle through that. And that's going to mean that you have a proper length peak, which I'll talk about a little bit more. And then, of course, we're trying to manage the fitness fatigue relationship so that on the day that matters, the meet, that we are the strongest that we can possibly be, that we have the highest possible fitness with the lowest possible fatigue, and the relationship between those. Because if you wait too long, fatigue might be really low, but now your fitness has started to fall off. Or if you go too soon, your fitness is high, but the fatigue is still high with it. So managing that relationship through the taper process is what allows you to have the greatest meet performance that you can possibly have. And I look at this, really for all sports. And I talked about my peaking history in powerlifting. I had the same thing doing track and field, where I was a shot putter through college and as a post-collegiate, and even going back to high school. I would, if I threw 58 feet in practice, I would throw 60 feet in the meet. In college, if I threw 62 feet in practice, I was going to throw 64 feet in the meet. Then I transitioned to strongman. When I won strongman nationals, I did the yoke farmers medley. My best in training with the same weights was about 38 seconds. I then went to the meet, to the strongman nationals, the event contest, and did that same event in 19 seconds. So in my eyes, that's really how it should work. Your best performances should be in competition where it matters the most. And that's happening for a variety of reasons, which we're about to talk about. So how to train for peaking. Peaking training in the primary lifts is going to be done at 85% plus intensity for sets of 1 to 3 reps. So that's going to be your work sets during this phase of training. Of course, you're going to warm up to that. And there might be some back down sets that are a little bit outside of that range, a little bit lighter in the efforts to retain hypertrophy, but that's going to vary on a case-to-case basis. Because these sets are so heavy, they're so stimulating from a nervous system standpoint, so fatiguing from a nervous system standpoint, and require the proper management of fitness fatigue for you to be able to complete the sets, even in training, we're going to very, very likely be reducing the number of sets of work sets within this overloading parameter, 85% plus for sets of 1 to 3, than you were doing in strength. So maybe if in strength you were doing 10 sets per week in the squat within those overloading parameters, which for strength was 75 to 90% for sets of 3 to 6 reps. Now in peaking, you're probably going to be doing, maybe 6 or 7 sets within this 85% plus range throughout the course of a week. And with all the phases, we're looking at choosing exercises appropriate for that phase's goal and for that time relative to competition, and whether that competition is on a sanctioned powerlifting platform with 3 mean, strict judges and dozens, maybe, of your family and friends watching, maybe a few more dozen around the world on a live stream. But whether you're doing it for that kind of competition or in your own garage at something like the Garage Gym competition sponsored by Juggernaut AI, or just for your own personal satisfaction, which is a great reason to do it as well, we want to choose exercises that are setting you up for the best performance on that day. So everything's kind of relative to being ready then. Setting a PR 6 weeks out, that's awesome. But you have a bad meet, you go and tell your Instagram followers, yeah, but remember that PR that I had 6 weeks ago? Well, it doesn't count. They're fine, but they don't really matter if you're a competitive powerlifter or if your goal is to have this highest 1 rep max possible. So as we look at selecting variations, as we're now closest to competition, we're looking at the most specific training. We're going to do a lot of competition exercises. So squatting to depth, to legal depth in your competition equipment, with your competition technique. So bar position, stance, all that stuff. That's going to be the primary thing that you do. Benching with the same situations, your competition grip, pause, all that stuff. Deadlift, your competition stance from the floor, low reps, that's going to be the heart of the training. That doesn't mean though that you need to totally eliminate any variations. Say if you're squatting twice a week during your peaking phase, that could be one competition squat day and one variation, but that variation is probably narrowing away from specialty bars or things like that into, maybe just pause squats, like pause competition squats, or you're a low bar squatter and your other day is high bar, which is really very similar. People ask what's the difference between high bar and low bar. I say about that much. Things aren't going to change a ton there. Maybe you're doing that from a fatigue management standpoint to save your arms a little bit. Maybe you just have a secondary day that's more competition squatting, and you're just manipulating the intensity of that day all the way down from a technique day, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second, to just a slightly lighter day. And I'm more inclined during a peaking phase to do two different variations in the same day. So, maybe you're going to do 3 or 4 heavy sets of competition squats and then 1 or 2 sets of pause squat after that, or safety squat, bar squat after your competition squats in the same session. So instead of each having its own day, you're kind of mixing them into the same session. That I just find works a little bit better from a structural standpoint for peaking. For the bench press, same idea. Mostly going to be doing competition grip bench pressing. You could use other variations as a fatigue management tool or as a mechanical overload or underloading tool. So, doing some competition bench pressing, then putting a 2 board on or a slingshot on, doing 1 or 2 more sets like that, or having a secondary day where maybe you do a little bit closer grip than normal, or, boards or a little bit wider grip, anything like that. But the variations you're using are narrowing and refining in our pyramid of strength, specificity kind of spectrum that everything's on. We're really way over there on the narrowest band of that spectrum at that point. So I mentioned technique work. So technique sets are just really practice, and depending on how strong you are, the stronger and more experienced you become, the lighter you can typically go on these and get some benefit from them. Using an extreme example, young curly-haired CWS. The year is 2016. A peaking squat workout for me is going to be, 915, 925 pound type of range. I can't do that twice a week. Far from it. When the weights become really, really heavy, you have to spread those sessions out further and further. But you don't want to just squat once a week, because the technical SRA curve is going to get violated with that. And you're not going to be, one of our main goals of peaking, refining and honing your technical prowess with just 1 time a week squatting. So then it's going to behoove you to introduce a secondary day, and that might be a technical day. So for me, I knew that at 170 kilos, so about 30% of my squat, I could feel technical errors that I may have been making. It was, heavy enough to give me that feedback where I could, all right, you set your hands the right way, your feet are the right way. Was your weight a little too far? Was it a little bit too far back? Did your hips rise a little bit fast compared to your shoulders? Those little changes, the more in tune you can be, the more mindful you can be with what you're doing, the lighter weight you'll be able to feel that at. So that's typically going to be all the way down for the most experienced lifters at about 30%. And then less experienced lifters might need more like 70 to 75% to feel that. But if you're doing 75% for a couple sets of 1 to 3 reps, all right, and really, again, thinking of it as like a deep practice concept, that it's almost like a visualization tool that you're going through and treating every single one of those reps the same way that you would, your opening attempt in a meet. So, whether you're having someone call the commands for you or just hearing the commands in your head, you're visualizing the process, again, of the dozens and dozens of screaming fans all around you, and the judges with their, judgy faces, holding their red flags, almost ready to raise it before you even begin your descent. Visualizing all of that, to set yourself up for the most effective practice possible. Using that as like a secondary day is going to be very helpful to develop the technical prowess. And it's also going to help actually manage and decay fatigue, because you're going to get blood flow to the exact same muscles that you're needing to recover from the squat. So while something like, dragging the sled can be useful from a recovery standpoint like that, it's much more general in nature. And when you're that close to competition, the more specific is going to be more helpful. I would rather use the squat to help me recover from squatting and help me learn how to squat than I would using something like sled dragging, which could be more appropriate in more general phases. So how much peaking should you do? It's going to vary pretty widely based on strength, gender, strength, experience, and size of the lifter. So on one side, if we have a 22-year-old female who's been training for a year and is squatting, let's say 100 kilos in the 52 kilo class, or 100 kilos in the 60 kilo class, if they've been training for a year maybe, they're gonna not need a very long peak and taper at all. They could probably do about, as short as maybe like 10 or 12 days worth of peaking type of training, and then have like a 3-day taper into that. So, they might do an 11-day peak and a 3-day taper. So they have a 2-week peaking block with that, where someone on the other side, like a, giant headed 6'1", 360 pound, muscular, that's fat and muscular at the same time, gentleman, who's been lifting for 15 to 20 years and is in his early 30s and squatting in the 900s, he's probably going to need a much longer peak and taper, probably, up to like 6 weeks of peaking training with up to a 2-week long taper. And that's going to happen because, as I mentioned, those highest level efforts, that when the weights are that heavy and that close to like your ultimate potential or the potential of anyone's ability to lift, they're going to have to be spread out pretty far. You're not going to squat heavy on Monday and squat heavy again on Friday and Monday and Friday. And so it takes time as you transition to create a smooth transition from hypertrophy to strength to peaking. It's going to take time to build up from those strength block weights to those top peaking weights that you need. So you might only be squatting heavy of those 6 weeks of training like every other week, and deadlifting heavy every other week on the opposite schedule, benching heavy a little bit more frequently. And then as you finish that peaking training, because the nervous system takes the longest to recover, compared to muscles, joints, and tendons, to decay that neural fatigue, that's why a long taper is going to be needed, because those super heavy weights generated so much more neural fatigue, because the longer you've been lifting and the better at it you are, the better at getting your nervous system to fire as many muscles as possible. You're more efficient in that. It's just like a bigger stimulus, so it's going to take longer to recover from. So on the short side, we're probably doing 11 days of peaking style training with a 3-day taper for a 2-week peaking block. And on the long side, getting out all the way out to 8 weeks with probably 6 weeks of hard peaking training and then into a 2-week taper. So now let's get on the whiteboard and kind of show you what an average type of peaking block might look like. All right, so now we're going to talk about actually designing a peaking block, putting all that stuff I just talked about together. So if you've been following along with the hypertrophy and strength videos, you knew that we were training 5 times a week there. In peaking, because of the training being higher intensity, more stimulating, more neurally fatiguing, very typical that we're going to cut down the frequency of the lifts and even cut down the frequency of the training, because now having 3 total days off, training for 4 days, having 3 days off versus 5 and 2, there's just going to be more recovery built into the structure of that program. So we're going from training Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday to Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, cutting out those Tuesday sessions, building in a little bit more recovery. So a lot of different ways that this can be structured and be effective. This is a plausible, possible way to satisfy the principles that we've been talking about. So the way that we're going to do this, we're going to make Monday and Friday our primary lower body days. So we're going to comp squat. On Monday, we're going to comp dead on Friday. We're going to complement those, all right? And again, what exercise you choose here is going to vary pretty widely based on how strong you are, how much stimulus you're able to generate, how effectively you can decay that fatigue. You can learn more about this in a video we have called Utilizing Variation for Fatigue Management. But let's say that in the deadlift, you don't decay deadlift fatigue that well. So after our competition squat, we're going to put a tech dead. But for the squat, you are able to tolerate and need a little bit more hard work. But let's say that if you start low bar squatting, comp squatting twice a week, that your arms start to feel real beat up and it negatively affects your bench press. So we're going to comp squat, and then let's come over here and go high bar squat. Now, what do these workouts look like? And it's going to be the same. We're going to stay with the same exercises through weeks 1, 2, and 3 here. So this is probably, if I had to pick, if I didn't know anything about you, the viewer, listener, and I had to just blindly say, how long of a peaking block do you probably need? I would say 3 weeks of hard training and a 1 week taper. Yeah, you might be 2.5 weeks of hard training and a 5-day taper, or you might be 4 weeks of hard training with a 10-day taper, but this is going to be a good, approximation for it. So if we keep these same exercises here in the first week, maybe we go to a 2 rep max, and then we do some back down sets, like 3x3 back down sets. The technique deads are going to look the way that a technique workout looks. Let's call it 5 to 8 sets of 1 to 2 reps. And that's going to be like, 40 to 60% for most people. I said 30 to 70 earlier, but unless you're really, really advanced watching this, you're probably above 30. And hopefully, because you're smart enough to watch the Juggernaut Training Systems YouTube channel, you're also smart enough to be really mindful and focused about what you're doing. So you can probably get away with feeling your technique out at 60% rather than 70%. So as we progress this Monday, let's talk about Friday first. So then on this comp deadlift day, the deadlift, particularly the conventional deadlift, it's generally more fatiguing, more demanding than the squat is for a lot of people. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to alternate weeks. We're going to squat heavy in weeks 1 and 3, and we're going to deadlift heavy in week 2. So that doesn't mean that the other weeks are easy or, truly light. They are just relatively lighter. So this day might look like, 85 to 90% for sets, maybe like 4 sets of 2. So we're not going up to a top set. This comp squat 2 rep max, that's probably at like, 93%. So, it might be 95%, depending on how this feels over here. Like I'd like these to mostly be 7 to 8 RPE feeling lifts. So 85% should be your 5 rep max. So if you do 2 reps at 85%, that should be a 7 RPE. Depending on how you feel that day, maybe you bump it up a little bit if you're feeling great, but I'd rather stay on the low side than go on the high, on too high. Now with this high bar squat, because it's not, actually a competition exercise, if we go a little bit below this range, I'm not going to be too upset about it. And you could be doing this as an effort to retain hypertrophy. So, maybe this turns into like 3x4 at, 80%. So we're a little bit below that range, but still a challenging workout. It's going to give your legs good stimulus. So what we're going to do, like I said, we're going to squat heavy in weeks 1 and 3, deadlift our heaviest deadlift in week 2, which is also going to put that heaviest deadlift about 15 days before the meet. So your meet here is the 4th week on the Saturday. So our comp squat, our second week, our lighter, medium, light week, whatever you want to call it, is going to be similar to this comp dead workout over here. So we're going to maybe squat for a little bit higher volume because the squat can typically handle a little bit higher volume. We'll do 4 to 5 sets of 2 to 3 reps at 85%. Staying with our technique deadlifts, same range, 40 to 60% for 5 to 8 sets of 1 and 2. And then finally in this third week, we're going to squat for a single up to a 9 or 9.5. Now you might be looking at this like, Chad, what am I doing if I don't do a 10 rep or a 10 RPE in my peaking block? How will I be able to do it at a meet? How did I squat 870 at a meet and then squat 870 in training and then 959 at the meet? Because of all the training that preceded this. All right. All the general strength and peaking stuff from the other videos. There is cumulative fatigue being built up and the cumulative fitness being built up with that that as we get into this last bit of the training and taper and that fatigue starts to fall off, you can, like, not exponentially, but like rapidly increase your ability to lift there at the end. If you're really worried about it from a confidence standpoint, what I would do here is squat up to 1 rep max at 9 to 9.5, all right, which could be a PR. It could be, 20, 30 pounds more than you've ever done before, because remember, RPE is specific to that day. It's all context dependent on how you feel that day. And then you could do a walkout and hold, which would be a mechanical overloading technique to help prepare your nervous system, your brain, both from neurologically and emotionally, to be ready for a heavy set. So maybe we go walkout and hold with 110% times 10 seconds. All right, so you squatted up to, let's say you squatted 450 for one. At the meet, maybe you're hoping to squat, 500. So now you go and do a walkout and hold with like 525, 550, hold it for 10 seconds. It's going to feel heavy because you haven't touched anything that heavy, but then you get to the meet and maybe you open at 200 kilos, then you go to 215, and now you're going to go for 227.5 and take your shot at your 500-pound squat. And you're like, oh, this doesn't feel too bad because I felt, 525 or 550 a couple weeks ago. So that's going to be a way to progress that. Tech deads down here again. Our deadlift, we're kind of flipping it. We're making week 2 our heavy day. So here we're going to go 1 RM at 9 or 9.5. I forgot to put any back down sets on this. Probably do like 3 by 2 after this. Here we'll go 2 to 3 by 1 to 2. 10 to 20% lighter than what you did for the 1 rep max. Progressing the high bar, a little bit heavier, a little bit reduction in volume. And then the last week is going to be, for the deadlift, a similar workout to what you did here, but we'll go down to singles instead of doubles. So we'll do, 3 to 4 by 1 at a little bit heavier, but even a 92.5%, which, 92.5, 93%, is probably your 2 rep max. You would be doing a 1 at 9 there, maybe 1 at 8.5, depending on how things are feeling. And I wouldn't be shocked if this day feels really shitty and that 92.5% feels like that's as heavy as I could have done today. And then you get in your head and you're like, oh my God, I'm not gonna be ready for the meet. But you've got the taper coming up, which we'll talk about more in a second. And again, we progressed the squat a little bit as well. 85% challenging squat workout, but not going to, overload you neurologically. We can start to decay that neural fatigue over the course of this next week. Now, bench press, because the bench press doesn't build as much fatigue. And if you're listening to this and you're like, well, I bench 550, I'd give you a little bit of a different answer. But if you're like a good bench presser, but not like, oh my God, this person is, insane at the bench, you probably don't need to apply this kind of alternating structure. We can just go week by week by week, get a little bit heavier, and different ways you could do it. So we're talking all comp bench on this primary day. You could go like a 1 at 8.5, and then maybe do 4 by 3 at 85 to 90 after it. Then we're going to go into week 2. Sorry, this is getting so messy. We'll go 1 at 9, and then we'll go 3 by 2 at 87 to 92. And then down here, we're going to go 1 at 10. And we're doing our bench press. Our heavy bench press is the closest thing to the meet. Our last heavy squat is about 12 days out. Our heaviest bench is going to be 10 days out, though we're still going to do something here in the taper as well. And our heaviest deadlift was 13 days out. So this little stretch here, this Friday, Monday, Wednesday, is going to be pretty demanding. That says 2 to 3 by 1 to 2 at 90 to 95. So that's going to be our primary bench press work. Depending on, again, how muscular you are, what kind of training you've been doing leading up to this, you might do a secondary bench press variation here, like a small change in your grip, feet up even. Feet up's a good, going to give you good work for the chest, but less, overall stress because the weight's not going to be as heavy. It's going to save your back a little bit if you've got a bit more of an extreme setup. But we come over here for our Saturday and maybe we're doing close grip and FU, feet up. All right, I'm not trying to be rude. So, and again, because we're trying to retain fitness, we go a little bit higher there, and that's probably going to be like 77 to 82. Then we're 2x4 at 80 to 85, and then 2x3, and I mean 2x4 for each, 2x3 for each at 82 to 87. And you're putting your other, very limited complementary accessory work around this. If you haven't been training for as long, your accessory work can stay relatively higher. If you're super big and strong, and this comp squat workout meant that you did, 750 for 2, and then you dropped down, to 300 kilos, 660 pounds, and did 3 triples with that, and then some technique deads, your accessory work might be like 1 or 2 sets of split squats or 1 or 2 sets of GHRs, and the opposite over here on the Friday. And then on the upper body days, it could be, that you're doing 3 to 4 sets of sub-maximal work for your back. So whatever, like chest supported row, lat pull down type of thing that you like, machine row, and then maybe, just enough direct shoulder, like a lateral raise, and direct tricep work to complement the primary work that you're doing. Again, key is complementing it. Let the main exercises be what your focus is on. I had a very strong bench presser that I was coaching to still his biggest competition bench presses ever. We were trying to do 600, and I think he ended up doing 578, and we were on a great track to do that 600. And then he had seen a YouTube video of someone going really heavy in tricep pushdowns, fairly close to the meet. So he thought, hey, maybe I should do really heavy on tricep pushdowns, even though Chad didn't tell me to do that. And he can tweak his elbow about 3 weeks out, and then we're playing catch up. Where if he just did normal tricep pushdowns, his elbow would have been healthy, and we probably would have benched 600. But that's a story for another day. So this is a effective way that it could look. Now, what should these taper workouts look like? If we're going to compete on Saturday, typically do 3 taper workouts, and those are going to kind of all be squat, bench, dead workouts. Maybe we even do a 4th or 5th, but those would be very small accessory, like 15 minutes, go and get some blood flow type of thing. So we're going to squat, we're going to bench, we're going to deadlift. The squat, again, the taper is designed to keep refining your technical prowess. So, you're not going to get better technique, let's say, during the taper, but you got to keep and stay in touch with all of the technique that you built. There are people who would advocate for this week being entirely off. Don't do that. You won't be as well recovered, and your technique will be worse. You'll feel stiff. All right. Maybe if you were warming up every single day, you could get away with it, but I would not suggest doing that. So we're going to squat, in a workout that's probably like 4 to 6 sets of, 2 to 3 reps at about 55 to 70%. The stronger you are, the lighter on that you're going to go. The bench press, you could do a little bit more work because the bench press is going to recover faster. So we could, in the bench press, even do something like a 1 at 8, all right, and then after it do 4 to 6 times 2 to 3, and a little bit heavier because the bench isn't as fatiguing. So let's call it 60 to 75%. And then the deadlift, because the deadlift, particularly conventional deadlift, is going to take the longest to recover from. That's going to be our just kind of most true technical work. So it's going to look pretty similar to what you've been doing on these other technique days. So you're doing maybe 40 to 60%. We're going to zoom in on this, don't worry. And you can just hear the words that I'm saying. 40 to 60% for, maybe 4 to 6 sets of 1. Again, deep practice, visualization, take that opportunity. On Wednesday, we're going to do something very similar to this, but about 10% less volume and 10% less intensity. So these 4 to 6 sets of 2 to 3 becomes 3 to 5 sets of 2, maybe 4 to 6 sets of 1 to 2 at 50, 45 to 60 or 65%. Same thing with the bench press. So what I'm talking about here is this Wednesday workout. And then on Friday, the day before a meet, and I know a lot of times Juggernaut AI users are like, oh my God, it wants me to work out the day before my meet. This is crazy. I'm not going to be recovered. That day before the meet workout is like loaded stretching with the bar. It's you're just going through and doing your technique, kind of going through that last visualization process, checking all the boxes, hearing having a friend call the start and rack commands, start, press, and rack commands if that's what you've got going in the bench. But you're just seeing that, you're sitting down at the bottom of the squat, kind of feeling your positions out. It might, like I was doing those workouts the day before the meet with 70 kilos in the squat. You might be using an empty bar, but go in there and move around, take 10 or 15 minutes for each lift, move around, see yourself being successful, go through your technique, get a little bit of blood flow to those muscles. You're not going crazy there. Like if you do more than 30% of your max on that day is probably the cap of what I would put it at. You want to kind of have a very, very light sweat, which if you're, like a super heavyweight might happen just because you're awake. Maybe you tied your shoes before, been there, big boned brothers and sisters. But do something on this day, move around, practice your technique, both with your body and your mind. So all of this is leading up to this one day, the one day that matters. The more work you've done early in hypertrophy and strength, the better peak you're going to be able to have, because the more you're going to be able to take away from if you've built up this bigger pool of tonnage and volume and workload. Where if you've always kind of been training low volume and you've always been peaking, you don't expect to have as profound an effect through the peak and taper if you've always been peaking, because you don't have that to take away from. You can't continually reduce the volume, because then you'd just be doing no work. So again, this is just one way that it could look. If you're newer, you're smaller, you're not lifting as heavy of weights, yeah, you probably want to bench press on this day as well. Marissa, super strong but super small, her peaking stuff was always squat, bench, and deadlift on Mondays. And then we would do very light squatting after her primary bench press on Wednesdays. And then Friday was comp deadlift and some technical squatting. And Saturday were a little bit of bench variation. So she was benching 3 times a week. There's a lot of gradations of how this is going to work, and you can learn more about that in our Principle of Individual Differences video, in Scientific Principles of Strength Training book, and learn about individual differences. Or you could be like, this is so overwhelming, and just sign up for the Juggernaut AI app, and it's going to customize all this stuff for you, and it's going to give you, the 10, 12-day taper if you're super big and strong and experienced. It's going to give you a 3 or 4 day taper if you're a lot newer to this. But this is kind of trying to hit the middle of the bell curve with this information here. So hopefully you learned a lot in this video, that you're not too overwhelmed with how to set up your peaking training. If you enjoyed the video, please like it, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you check out the hypertrophy and strength videos. Really, if you have a question about how to train for powerlifting, we probably have a video about it already. So, you might have to go back to an older version. You'll see a guy with kind of curly, wild hair, not so much here in the front, but everywhere else, wild and curly hair that was hanging on for dear life. And hear a younger version of me talk about some of these topics, but go on a deep dive into the old stuff. Leave a comment on one of those old videos about how dumb my hair was. Why didn't anyone tell me to shave it? But hopefully you like that. And again, all these videos are brought to you by the Juggernaut AI app. So you can visit juggernautai.app, link down in the description, and get a 2-week trial for that. Thanks for watching.